Welcome to the podcast Melody and Friends, where I will be taking a virtual tour around the world and interviewing all kinds of wonderful people. And today I land in Nashville, Tennessee, virtually, to talk to my new friend, Meredith Boggs, about the journey home, a biblical guide to using the Enneagram to deepen our relationships. Welcome, Meredith.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Yeah. So have you been in Nashville like your whole life or recently?
Born and raised here. My parents moved here shortly after they got married so my dad could pursue his dream of being a songwriter, and they never left. He made it and they never left. So I was born and raised here, and Nashville is home.
That is so fun. So fun. Well, tell us, I guess for anybody that doesn't know anything about Meredith, why don't you just take a little deep dive into your story wherever you want to go and tell us about you and life in Nashville, how you met your husband and the Enneagram, all the things.
Okay. Well, yeah. So I'm Meredith, again, born and raised in Nashville. I'm like, okay, which part of the story do I start with? I was introduced, I had met my husband in middle school. We started dating in high school. So we've been together for quite a while, been married for almost 10 years. And then I was introduced to the Enneagram shortly after I met him in high school. I was in counseling at the time for an eating disorder, and the Enneagram is part of the framework that this ministry used. Daystar is the name. So if you're familiar with Sissy Goff, David Thomas, they've written a lot of books. They're pretty remarkable. That is where I was. And they love the Enneagram there. And so they kind of walk through it with the kids that they see. And so that was my introduction to it. And I always make this little caveat. I think tests are fantastic and they're really helpful, but they're not the end all be all, because when I first tested, I tested as a type 1, and which is not surprising because I was in counseling at the time for an eating disorder. A lot of my behaviors were very aligned with the type 1. But Sissy gave me the Enneagram book called The Enneagram Made Easy, and I went home and read it and got to the type 8 chapter, and I was like, oh no, I'm not a type 1, I'm a type 8. This is very bad. And so I always tell people tests are they're a great jumping off point to kind of get you started, to send you in a certain direction, but read on all the types, talk to people about it, listen to podcasts, listen to conversations. The Enneagram is so much of an oral tradition. And so that is how I think we really identify ourselves. So that was my introduction to the Enneagram. And then used it. It was a really helpful framework all through high school and college, just understanding myself better, understanding friends. I have always loved writing and knew that I wanted to write books, be a writer in some way or another, but I also really was passionate about nursing. And so I graduated from college with a degree in nursing and still practice as a nurse. I worked ER, ICU, and now I currently work in transport for Lifeway here at Vanderbilt. And also I work as a forensic nurse examiner. So we take care of patients, victims of sexual assault, and provide them with medical care. Also the forensic component of that. And then, have also been writing and blogging all these years, and then finally landed my first book deal, which released just a month ago in January, that Thomas Nelson published. So it was a book on the Enneagram, which is funny because I've known about it for a long time. And then the Enneagram re-emerged. It kind of blew up in the Christian space in 2016, 2017, when The Road Back to You came on the scene, which is a great book. And it was funny because all of a sudden people are like, have you heard about this thing called the Enneagram? I was like, yeah, I was that weird person a long time ago that never talked about it because people thought it was really crazy. And so it's been fun to see the Enneagram just be a really helpful tool for Christians and transformative in their personal growth and spiritual growth. That's kind of a little bit of my story about me. And then you mentioned this a little bit, but I've got a little 2-year-old, and then we're almost 2, and then another one that'll be here in 5 weeks, give or take. So that's life right now. It's a little wild.
Yeah, I love everything that you just said. And I want to circle back around to a couple of things, because one, you mentioned that you went into counseling for an eating disorder. Obviously you've got some stress signs at that point, which is probably why you typed as a 1.
Yeah.
But many times people think, a certain tool could be not helpful. And I love a really good counselor. I'm a coach. I'm not a counselor. I love coaching because I really can help people with the practical tools. But I've been walking with betrayed women for 12, 13 years, which is why I really wanted to start in on the Enneagram, because it was like at some point they're walking out of that betrayal trauma and they're stepping more into identity. And this was just an easy tool to begin to help people step into their best version of themselves. But what was it? Because the beautiful process of counseling is that we get to kind of go back so that we can go forward. But how did the counseling center weave in the Enneagram tool as well? I think it's a beautiful thing to talk about.
Yeah, I think for me during that time, it really helped me identify what was at the root of the behaviors. And that's what the Enneagram is. Enneagram is not, that's what differentiates it from Myers-Briggs, DISC, Strengths Finders. It's not about your behavior, it's about the motivations underneath it. And so in that context, it was really identifying, okay, what is driving these behaviors? What's motivating you? And for me as a type 8, it was of course centered on control, this fear of betrayal or this fear of vulnerability, and ultimately surrender. And so that's kind of where it emerged for me. And also that was really the first time in my life. I grew up in the church with an amazing family and loved Jesus. And I look back and I'm like, my faith as a child was real, but it feels like it was really in high school at that time that it became my own. And it was like, okay, this is my just my need for a savior, for redemption. All of that was highlighted so much in the recovery in that season. So yeah, and then that's also how the Enneagram factored into it as well. It was just really, I think what you said too, helping people, you look back so that you can move forward. And I think the Enneagram is so helpful because it's not diagnostic. It's not a box to put someone in. It's not a stereotype. And I get this question a lot. People, they push back and they say, well, as a Christian, you're not supposed to put your identity in anything except for Christ. And I'm like, yes, absolutely. Like, do not identify yourself with the Enneagram, but let the Enneagram help you identify parts of yourself that are not Christ-like, so that they can be transformed and made into his likeness. And so I love that you're walking with women through that, because that's a huge part of recovery, whether it's betrayal, whether it's an eating disorder, whatever, is identifying these parts of ourselves that inhibit us, that keep us entangled in our sinful patterns, or in past hurts, past betrayal, so that we can walk in transformation and move forward in healing. So, yeah.
So what would you say? And I'll piggyback what you just said. One of the beautiful parts that I've loved about the Enneagram is that when you kind of begin to understand that the number that you most identify with, and then both wings on the side where you go in strength and stress, you're actually identifying or in relationship with 5 of the 9 numbers. And when we look at the life of Christ, he exemplified each one of those. So more than likely, one of my numbers is going to intersect with yours. And now I've got empathy. So there's so many facets to this that is such a beautiful process in learning and growing. And this is the way you're wired, and this is the way I'm wired, that I feel like just really helps foster a Christian gospel-centric community.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's so accurate. And the underlying thread is that empathy. I tell people a lot of times, I'm married to a type 3. And so sometimes on the outside, we look really similar in our behaviors, but we're motivated by very different things. I mean, and as far as core emotion, 3s, shame is their game. And, as an 8, it's anger for me. And so, but having access to different types in stress and security, my wing types, really has given me a lot of empathy for my husband, and vice versa, him understanding why I am the way that I am, why I see the world, why I think the way that I do, why I operate. And that is one of the gifts of the Enneagram, is that compassion. And I think it starts with knowledge. I think it's the knowledge of self, knowledge of God, and knowledge of others. And the Bible even speaks to the importance of the knowledge of self. Lamentations tells us to examine our ways, and obviously knowing God helps us to see ourselves and know ourselves accurately. And then the overflow from that is knowing and loving our brothers and sisters in Christ. And empathy is that common denominator. So I think you're spot on with that.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's so neat about this, like when I've had couples come in and, they're both like this on the ends of the couch, and they don't even want to see each other, especially when it's around betrayal, and there's so much trust and unsafety at that moment. I can reframe, which I'm a type 7, so I reframe for a living and I reframe in my DNA.
I love it.
But the professional reframing is actually what provides perspective. So
Yeah.
we haven't dealt with the betrayal. We haven't even got to the gospel pieces yet, but I can bring out tools with the Enneagram. And in those moments, they can begin to go, oh, wow, this is what I fell in love with about this person.
Mhm.
And this is what I like about this person. And then we'll eventually tackle all the other things. But it
Mhm.
really is a tool that helps you open your perspective
Yeah.
up and your lens up to yourself and the world around you. And I've loved that part of it.
Yeah,
I really have.
absolutely.
So what's one of the things I would say that female type eights have a little bit more difficulty, maybe in the southern part of the
Yeah.
states than the others. And actually, fun fact, one of the most underserved personality types is the female eight within the church. And I
Ooh,
think that's
that's
fascinating.
fascinating. I mean, yeah, I believe it. And I think what you said about the culture piece too is spot on. Staff doesn't know what to do with eights in general, but much less female eights. And I tell people, thankfully I was born and raised here, so I feel like I have a lot of two attributes about me just from being raised as a woman in the South, and so I can turn on that too if I need to. In a
Challenge
split
with
second.
dignity.
But yeah, it is funny sometimes being a type 8 female in the South. And I also get told a lot that you don't present as an 8. I like to think that as I've gotten older and as Christ has been so kind to refine me, that I come across a lot less abrasive than maybe I did in my younger days. And so maybe that 8 doesn't come off so strongly in the beginning. But yeah, I think what
The
you
two
said, the
goes,
culture
the
piece.
eight goes to two in health. So that makes
Yeah,
beautiful sense. Yeah,
yeah,
that's awesome.
yeah, yeah.
And
So,
it's funny because a guy eight, a male eight, he's angry. I mean, you're like, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And if a female is, you're like, whoa, whoa.
Yeah, it's like, whoa, 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 back it down. Yeah.
So what would you say, Meredith, has been like one of the ahas that you've had? I can share, one of mine, but just like even outside the counseling room, just in my time alone with the Lord, like him showing me certain things about the intricacies of my personality through the Enneagram,
Mhm.
which is obviously what we're going to get into in just a minute, your book, but that have been like just a beautiful moment, aha moment that you've had with yourself.
Yeah, I think the biggest one that comes to mind really, it's from the past couple of years of my life, so it's not even something specific. But if you're familiar with the 12-step world, the recovery, step one is admitting your powerlessness. And sometimes people in the recovery world, they think, okay, you work the 12 steps and then you're done. But anyone that's been in and around it long enough, whether you've been in recovery yourself, whether you've been working a program alongside of a spouse or a family member or a friend who is actively in recovery, you realize that it's not a one and done. You go back and you work those 12 steps again and again and again your whole life, and you're continually learning and growing. And it's very, I think Christians can be pretty turned off by it because it has all this higher power language and it's not explicitly tied to the gospel. And I get it. And at the same time, there's a lot of really helpful tools about it. It really helps people practically who are in recovery. And I think and there's a lot of parallels between the 12 steps and the gospel, what we see in the word of God. And so for me, step one, admitting your powerlessness, is where I go back to as an 8, because you can armor up, you can come across so strong. And at the end of the day, you actually are powerless to everyone else and everything else in the world. And God is ultimately your protector and your provider. And he is the one that will be there for you when you experience the most unexpected betrayal or whatever it is. But for me, that as an 8, I feel like that invitation into surrender and admitting my powerlessness is where it all starts and where it all ends. And it's where I have been and I will return to again and again throughout my life. And just how that also just parallels with my journey of transformation as a follower of Christ, what the things that I see him trying to refine in me very much align with this relinquishing control, surrendering to him, and admitting that I can't do it on my own and I need his help. So I would say it's not super specific, but I would just say in the last couple of years, that's been the theme of my life and
Yeah.
how it's correlated with my Enneagram type.
Yeah, and I met somebody over the last month. I went to a workshop in Charlotte, and she does the Enneagram and the 12 steps together. And
Oh,
I've not
cool.
actually seen it, but if some of you are listening out there and you're like, okay, what is the 12 steps? I mean, you can just memorize the gospel waltz, which is the 1, 2, 3. I can't, God can, and I'm gonna let him.
Yes.
And then when we can do those 3 steps, now we can step into a moral inventory and say, okay, where is it that I am not relying on God? I'm relying on myself. So
Yeah.
I love that you brought in that piece. And such a beautiful piece with a type 8 who wants some control, powerless. No, no.
I know I've joked with people now that like since I've kind of, dabbled in the recovery world for a while, but since I've like been actively in it, like I'm still stuck at step 1. I can't move on. I'm always going back and again. I'm stuck here forever.
And
So
it's the most beautiful and brutal place to be at the same time, right? You're like,
yeah.
I want it. No, I don't want it. I want it. I don't want it.
Yes.
That's so
Absolutely.
beautiful. That's so beautiful. So I guess, and I'll share in a second, but what would you say has been like the greatest aha in your relationship with your husband, with you being an 8 and a type 3, just, learning about the Enneagram and relationships and one another? What's that been like?
Oh my gosh. I
And
mean,
I know there's not one thing, but
no, it's been really refining. He was introduced to the Enneagram around the same time that I was, because once you learn about it, you like suck in all the people around you. So he had no choice. We're just like high school sweethearts trying to live life, and I'm like, no, the Enneagram. What's your type? So we've had the gift of it in our relationship for several years. I think I don't know. I'm trying to think of one specific thing. I think where I have really, I'll just call myself, I think where I've really misstepped over the years, and this kind of highlights the difference between 3 and 8s, is 8s are going to die on the hill of truth and authenticity. If they see inauthenticity somewhere, they are going to like burn the place down until it's addressed. And I have seen that so much in my younger self, and have had to see how the Lord has graciously been like, that is not your work to do in your husband. That is my work to do. And as a type 3, when they fall into, shame or sin patterns, that kind of shape shifting of their personality emerges. And maybe they're not just telling a full blown lie. Maybe it's just like, just kind of like angling themselves or angling a situation in a certain way. But I just, in my younger days would just call it out in really unhelpful and unkind ways. And it was like, you can't, like, I think I a lot of times justified truth. I justified my unkindness with truth, which is not acceptable and not okay on any level. And so I think over the years, God has been kind enough to transform me and say, hey, you know what? He's mine. I'm taking care of this. I know it drives you crazy, but like stay in your lane, put your head down, work on your own stuff, because you got plenty of it, and let me deal with him on it. So I think that's one of the ways as a 3 and an 8 that they really kind of conflict in some ways.
no,
And
I would
eight,
totally, I can totally see that. Yeah, the shape shifting, and you're like, wait, were you just being honest?
yeah, it's like,
He's
wait a
probably
second,
like,
no.
yeah, I was sharing like that better, best part of me.
Yes. Or we have 2 completely different accounts of a story of what actually happened. And I'm like, no, mine is the truth. And so
Love it.
it's wild.
I love it. I love it. So I don't know if I told you that I'm a type 7, but I think one of the like biggest aha moments that I've had, and like you, I've been in counseling and know counseling, and as a life coach, all these things, and then the Word of God obviously brings out so much. But then the Enneagram, it was almost like I finally connected the dots of this rambunctious little girl who didn't necessarily do great in school, because I just needed to run around the school 5 times and then come back in and do schoolwork, and I was eating excessively and all the things, and squirrel. But to know that, part of my own personal story of betrayal and just things, I've created content over the years, and I'm creating Enneagram content now for people to step into their better, best version, so that rambunctious little girl can move to that 5 and innovate and create, but also help people step into their best version with tools. That to me was like mind blowing. I'm like, oh my gosh, I am smart. I can create. I can sit down and focus. Now I have to borrow tools from the type 1 and the 8 to get, to focus with intensity. But that's kind of the beautiful process of the Enneagram too, is you can borrow from all the, attributes of the other numbers to go, no, I need more of this to make this happen. Or I need a 1 working with me at all times to create the structure that I need. And so I don't know. I love the additional layers that the Enneagram provides us to see ourselves, through the lens, but also to uncover beautiful parts of everybody else.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Now, I know you're not allowed to do that. I know we're not supposed to do this, but like, how old is your son? Is he 2?
He's 2. Yeah.
Is he 2? Do you see any like remnants yet of any kind of personality, or is he just a rambunctious 2-year-old?
I've over the years, I've gotten to the point that when I meet people, I don't even think anymore like, oh, I wonder what type they are. Because we all do it. And I got to a point that I was like, okay, I really have to stop doing this. And so I don't even think that anymore. And people ask me regularly, they're like, what type do you think your kid is? I'm like, I don't know, but I see some parts of myself in him that I'm like, oh God, I'm going to start praying right now against that. But he's also 2 years old. And so I have no idea. I have no idea what type he is. But I think it'll be fun to watch as he grows older and his brother grows older, just to see who they are emerge. But yeah, I mean, even just like the way that he will say things, sometimes I'm like, oh no, that's exactly what I say, or that's like the inflection that I use. And so you see parts of yourself that you've already
Awesome.
impressioned your child with. And so I don't know about his type yet, but I'm excited to see it emerge as he gets older.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the journey home. How did all this get birthed?
Yes. I love that phrase, because that's what it feels like with a book. So it's funny, I tell people I never planned to write a book on the Enneagram. It was my kind of like 3 strikes you're out, or third time's the charm. I had written and pitched 2 book proposals. I wrote one in 2019, 2020, pitched those, kind of was like coming up at dead ends, got some good feedback, got some interest from agents, but nothing that ever materialized into a publishing deal. And so when I wrote the proposal for this book, I was pregnant at the time. It was October of 2020, and I was like, okay, this is it. Like, if this one doesn't get picked up, then I'm going to hang up my hat for a while, and I'll obviously keep writing forever because I'm a writer, but it will just be not now for publishing. And so well, and I'll give a little backstory to this book of just how the idea for it came about. In our mid-20s, my husband and I lived abroad for a year, working for a nonprofit organization in China, which provided medical and surgical care for orphan kids. And it was an amazing time and an amazing experience, and also really challenging and really hard. And we both, so after a year, moved back to the States, pretty burned out on all fronts, spiritually, emotionally, professionally. So we dove back into working here. Also, the church that we grew up going to was planning a location in Nashville, and it just kind of fit with where we were in life better. So we joined with that. But anyone that knows that there's a lot of gifts of a very small church, and also being part of a church plant is not for the faint of heart, because you do everything Sunday in and Sunday out, and also during the week. And so by the time we were in our mid-20s, just found ourselves in a place that we're just burnt out on all fronts, and went back into counseling at the time. And the Enneagram, again, it was kind of like that time, and the road back to you came out, and there was this big boom in the Enneagram world. And so some of the counseling that we were a part of used that framework, and I loved it and found it super helpful. But the thing that I kept coming back to was I was in a place that I was feeling really stagnant in my faith, and not like I wanted to walk away from it. Had wrestled very deeply with God over just kind of holding like what we had seen and witnessed and experienced with who he is and who we know him to be. And also saying, yeah, but how can all this stuff happen and you still be good and faithful and kind? And I think that's people are like, I don't know how you do that working with kids. I don't primarily work with kids for that reason, because that's just the one thing. The pediatric population, I'm like, that makes me really reckon hard with God on some things. So I take care of them when I need to, and I just don't prefer to do that every day. But so through a lot of that, just was feeling really stalled out and stagnant in my faith, and like I said, not ready to throw in the towel, but just didn't know how to really reconcile it all. And so with the Enneagram, I was looking for ways to incorporate it with my faith, with my spiritual growth, but there just wasn't anything that felt accessible. It was like everything was a little bit too cerebral. It was out there. It wasn't practical for my daily life. And so that's kind of where this book ended up being born from a few years later. This is a book that I would have wanted during that time as a type 8 to really dive into my spiritual struggles and strengths and see how my core emotion and my fears, how that all ties into my walk with the Lord. And so, so then again, fast forward back to 2020, putting together this proposal, and it was the one, and it got picked up. And a funny little backstory on it is so my son we kind of had some suspicion that he might come early. So it wasn't a total surprise. But I woke up one morning and I was like, oh, I think this might actually be it. And so had an appointment with my midwife, went to the appointment. She was like, yeah, you need to go to the hospital to get observed. If the contractions don't stop, then you're having a baby today. So on my way to the hospital, I get an email from my agent. She's like, hey, I'm at Pub Board, which is the meeting where they decide what they're going to publish, with Thomas Nelson this week. And they like your proposal, but we have some questions about it. Can you give me a call? Can we talk later this week? So I'm like, emailing her back, and I'm like, I don't know if I have to later this week. Can we talk now? So I'm talking to her from the waiting room while they're like getting my room ready, talking to her. And she's like, yeah, they like your proposal, but they want to see these few tweaks. Can you just do it and get it to me by the end of the week? And again, I'm like panicking, and I'm like, honey, I know you're parking the car, but can you please drive home and get my laptop and bring it here? So I spend the next probably 4 to 6 hours in triage, hooked up
during contractions.
Yes, like finishing one proposal, sent it off, and then 6 hours later, my son was born. So then they gave me a call a month later. They were like, yeah, we want to publish your book. So so then I panicked, because I was like, oh my gosh, I have a baby now, and now I'm gonna write this whole book. So spent the next year writing it, and it just released. But it's called The Journey Home, a biblical guide to using the Enneagram to deepen your faith and relationships. And I tell people it is just a primer on spiritual growth according to your Enneagram type. The first few chapters cover the origins of the Enneagram. The hot question right now in the Christian subculture is, should Christians be using it? I know there's a lot of stuff going on out there. And as a classic type 8, I just present both sides, and I'm like, here's all the information. Now you choose what you want to do with it. But then gives a little bit of history on it, a little introduction to the Enneagram, and then each chapter on the different types walks through. There's a brief little introduction, but then we walk through the sin tendency of each type, the virtue of each type, and then how to grow according to your Enneagram type. So it's my heart behind it was to make it really accessible for people, something that they could pick up and implement that day in their spiritual walk. There's scriptures for each type, little bullet points at the end of each chapter little practices that you can start incorporating into your spiritual life. So that's about the book.
That's awesome. And so 2020, you write this, you had a baby, and then last month?
2021. 2021, it had the baby, got the book contract, so wrote the book, and then 22 was kind of editing, finishing it up, marketing, and then it just released at the beginning of 23.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's so exciting. I love that. And now you've got baby number 2 about to be here. So.
Yeah, and that was a real big and great surprise that got thrown into the middle of all this. So have
step 1, right?
Right. Yeah. yeah, I had this book release in January, baby due in March, and yeah, so we're just in it.
Hang on for the ride.
Yes, yeah.
I love it. I love it. Well, any just closing thoughts? I'm excited about the book. I'm excited about getting this out to people. And I'm just super passionate about people finding tools to learn more about themselves, but also others in the world around them. I just think that's so much. I work with a lot of college students and they just feel like in the world of, of the digital age, they don't feel connected online. And so I think these tools will allow them to begin to open their world up and learn about themselves and others. And I love what you've done. So I will make sure, I want you to tell everybody how to get in touch with you. But then I'll make sure all the links are in the show notes and we get this out to everybody. So
thank you. Yeah, I was going to say I'm out there in the wild world of the internet. I'm on Instagram at Meredith W. Boggs. Also on Facebook. I'm on TikTok, Meredith Boggs. I feel very much like a geriatric millennial on TikTok. Can't keep up. I don't know the latest trends. And then my website is meredithwboggs.com. And then if you do /links, that'll take you to a lot of free resources, links to the book, all the different things. There's some blog posts and other things on the Enneagram as well there.
Awesome. And do people purchase the book on your website or do they go to Amazon?
Yeah, you can anywhere. Amazon, wherever you purchase books. Amazon, Target, Barnes and Noble. And then there's links. There's links on the website, so it's wherever. Yeah.
Yes, I love this. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I come to Nashville every so often. My son is there now, but I think he may be headed to Colorado. But anyway, lots of friends in Nashville and such a beautiful place. So at some point I'll have to I'll have to connect with you. We'll have to have coffee or
I was gonna say we'll have to
amazing restaurants that are around Nashville.
Yes. I love that.
Thanks so much for being with us today. And like I said, I'll get all the links in the show notes and we'll get this out to everybody.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. This episode has been brought to you by Number, the Enneagram dating and connections app. The modern day today of connecting online is broken. We have swipe fatigue, we have anonymous connections, and an uptick in divorce. My name is Melody, CEO and founder of Number, the Enneagram dating and connections app. Psychology Today explains that social connectedness, people who are connected with friends, family, support groups, and their community, generates a positive feedback loop of social, emotional, and physical well-being. They have lower depression and anxiety, more trusting toward others, have higher self-esteem, less antisocial behavior, and lower rates of suicide. At the current pace of technology and social media today, basically relationships are threatened, and there's no way better back to one another than through the Enneagram. It's got a proven track record by mental health experts, saves a lot of time and wasted energy because now you've got a language to connect with others. And there's 50 million TikTok viewers searching for the Enneagram alone on TikTok. So I want you to find your number, find your connections today, and download Number.